Hey everyone, it's Janice from the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm excited to tell you that my book is now for sale. It's called Divorcing Religion, a memoir and survival handbook, and I'll make sure you have a link in the notes for that. And also I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and become a member of my YouTube channel. Take care. Hey everyone, welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor, a religious trauma recovery coach, and I want to remind you, ticket sales are on now for Shameless Sexuality, Life After Purity Culture, and I'll be hosting that event in beautiful Seattle this May. So join us. Go to shamelesssexuality.org for your tickets. Today's guest on the Divorcing Religion podcast is Dr. Josie McSkimming, who joins us from Australia. She's previously been a guest on the Divorcing Religion podcast and was also a speaker at Court 2023. Dr. McSkimming is a clinical social worker with more than 35 years experience and personal experience with religious trauma. When I learned that she'd published a book about her life, I wanted to read it right away. Her book is called GUTSY Girls, Love, Poetry, and Sisterhood. Josie grew up in the shadow of her oldest sister, Dorothy, who was one of Australia's most charismatic and courageous literary figures. Josie watched Dot become an award-winning, iconic poet, but theirs was a family of complex dynamics. Their father's emotional volatility made life unpredictable for Josie and her sisters, with Josie and Dot seeking very different escapes. While Josie fell into evangelical Christianity and psychotherapy, Dot found the arts and sex. Literary critic Bernadette Brennan called GUTSY Girls an illuminating, unique perspective on the brilliant, passionate Dorothy Porter. GUTSY Girls tells an intimate story of generational trauma, complex family dynamics, and deep sisterly love. Oh, it's all true. Welcome, Josie. I'm so glad to see you again.
Thank you, Janice. That's a lovely introduction. Thank you.
I appreciated your book so much. And when we had met in the past, when I had interviewed you, and then of course, when you spoke at court, you mentioned your sister, that she had, been a poet and was well known in Australia.
Yes. Yes.
But until I read your book, I really didn't have a feel for the type of person she was, the type of family that you grew up in, the various challenges that you had to meet and overcome and deal with to become the successful social worker and author that you are today. You had a lot going on, and I could totally relate. Sometimes I would stop. I'd say to my husband, "It's just like me, wasn't she?" Because we had so many things in common.
Yeah. Well, I do wonder how many of us with lived experience, ex-evangelicals, ex-fundamentalists, have these kind of complicated family backgrounds. I mean, I didn't grow up with the religious family, and some people have suggested to me, and I think there's some merit in this, that there's some advantages in not growing up with the religious family. Yes, I had other problems, but at least if I didn't have the religious family, when I finally shed all the religion, I didn't have to kind of deal with those relationships as well, with all that disappointment and shaming and prayers for your soul and all that. They all just sort of were relieved and wondered why it took so long to kind of shed the skin. Yeah.
I've heard those words myself. I have two older brothers and an older sister, and my oldest brother, said to me, "Well, what took you so long?" Which wasn't the most helpful or validating comment he could have made, but I did understand that it had been painful for him through the decades, watching me get lost in Christian fundamentalism, and just really working so hard to suppress myself and try and hide who I was, all in this effort to try and help my husband to shine, my first husband, who'd been a
Oh,
pastor
yes.
and had all these dreams of ministry. So I thought I had to be less. And there comes in the head coverings, to try and help me hide myself, remind myself to submit.
Yes, and a
But
lot of your listeners will know that you were sort of the veteran in the head covering. I mean,
oh my gosh. Yeah. And if you guys want pictures, buy my book,
yeah,
Divorcing
by the
Religion,
book,
a
because
memoir and survival.
I can say now they are hilarious, but at the time, oh, so serious.
Oh,
But yes,
so
it is
serious.
interesting, isn't it? That kind of how long it took, and I think for me, when I try and measure it all up, it was about 35 years in. So nobody can ever say I wasn't a proper Christian or a real one or I backslid. No, 35 years. And it takes so long to move out of, those structures and those strictures. And it was only really in the writing of the book when I was so retrospective, about my life that I realized the part my elder sister had played. And it hadn't been overt. It had been the subtlety of the things that she'd given me to read, the fact that I had observed her life from afar, and she'd included me in, adventures that I wish I'd had.
Mm-hmm.
As you said in that introduction, I chose the evangelical Christianity and the compliance and, this kind of very staid and constrained life, and she chose something far more interesting. And by the time I emerged at 45, I had 3 children and a husband, and, I kind of felt that ship had sailed for me a bit. And people have asked me how you rebuild community when you leave, and I feel as though that's one of those losses that we don't talk about enough, that we didn't have some of those experiences, some of those friendships with those different kinds of people, that I think she had, that I wish I'd had. I was in Christian Bible study groups at university, where she was joining the Dramatic Society and the Poetry Society and hanging out in the bar.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Bible study with my head bowed. But
yes. Oh, I can totally relate to that. Yes, I absolutely do. And when I'm thinking of some of the themes in your book, it's we just can't get around the fact that growing up in a home with an unpredictable, emotionally volatile parent that is prone to rages. That was my father. That was your father. It leaves a mark on us. And it's terrifying. It's frustrating. And then as they age and as we age, there's still a whole lot to come to terms with, even though we're not living with them anymore. But even the decision whether we want to remain connected to this person or whether, in my case, I felt that there was too much toxicity. So I chose estrangement. But I can tell you, neither is easy. It's easy, whether you stay or whether you go. It is really like divorce. It's going to be hard and painful either way. And then, of course, when you have siblings as well, it just can be a really difficult and challenging and painful.
Well, and and I talk with my clients, as I'm sure you do, about boundaries with these parents and about how passive or active you want that boundary to be, whether it's sort of active like an estrangement or whether it's more passive, a sort of an arm's length drift, whether that's easier to maintain than those hard and fast rules. I mean, I did pull quite away from my parents when I had small children, and I felt, very extraneous to the family dynamic and not important and unloved and all of that, and moved right on the other side of Sydney. Yeah, the downside of that is I had no help. I mean, my mother had to spend all of her time managing my father. And so, she was She was a wonderful woman and tried to help me, but I was on the other side of Sydney. She couldn't help me. So I had those 3 small children, 3 under 4, with no help.
Oh.
I know. Cried every day, I think. But I think that actually, even though it was hard, that distance at least helped me to sort of, grow into my own self and to my own life. I found one of the hardest things about my father, quite apart from writing about him in the book, which has been extraordinarily difficult, the guilt, the shame, sort of like leaving the church all over again, because that's another abusive relationship. And so writing about this, the disloyalty and the emails I've had from colleagues of him who are a little shocked, a little disappointed at what I have said.
Not disappointed in his behavior, but disappointed that you shared about it.
Yeah, that's right. And my kind of spiky relationship with him, as described in a review in a law journal about the book. Look, it wasn't terrible, but it was kind of making it my problem. But yes, apart from that, it was the aging that really got me, that when he was aging, the difficulties that you have in kind of trying to decide the relationship you want to have. And it's so galling to be managing the aging and the sort of the very complex needs of an elderly person, somebody who has hurt you so much. And his behaviour just got worse with the sort of the temporal lobe dementia and the frontal lobe dementia. It just got worse. Mm-hmm. And so he was so unpredictable. And I mean, it was very difficult, but I did feel it was my duty with my sister that we had to do this. I had to do it. Who else was going to do it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, your mom was the same age essentially as your dad,
exactly.
So she couldn't manage it.
She couldn't. Yeah. And she had Parkinson's. She had a lot of physical problems, and she really couldn't.
Yeah.
But my mother, she said she was going to and do her absolute level best to survive him, because she said he will be so much worse when I'm dead. And so she did. She did survive him. Yes. Thank you, Mum. She did her. She survived him by a year, and she had a good year without him. At 96, 95 to 96.
Oh my God! Your mom said or made kind of a profound statement. It really hit me in the book regarding your dad and the difficult relationship. There's something along the lines of she could handle him because she actually came from such a loving, strong environment.
Yeah.
But of course, you girls didn't have that. You got love and strength from her and from her parents, but he and his family, it just was a nightmare. And that made so much sense to me. I couldn't believe I had never thought that about my own mom, because I had always been my siblings, and I would say, why did she stay? Why did she stay? Like, why did she stay so long? But I think that's part of it.
Why?
Yeah, see, she came from a loving family.
When my mother said that to me, it made so much sense, because I was trying to explain to her at the time why, whenever he would sort of start the beginnings of an explosion, this is when I long left home. So you'd go down to visit and you knew it was coming.
Yeah.
And I'm sure anybody who's grown up in a family like ours knows exactly what I'm talking about. And you could just hear it in the voice. And I said to my mother, when that happens, I'm going to leave immediately. Now, I want you to know that that's what's going to happen. I'm just going to say bye and go. And they lived a long way from me. So, I'd arrive, I'd be there for a short time. He'd start, I'd say, I'm going now. And I said that to my mother so she wouldn't, be hurt or distressed that I was going so soon. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, I actually understand why you need to go, because she understood triggering. She understood the terrible resonance and the dysregulation and all of the sort of the post-trauma stuff. And so she said, I don't have it the same as you do. So interesting, wasn't it?
Yes. Wow. Just that incredible.
Really stable parents, loving parents, and that extremely caring household that she grew up in was so fortifying.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet there was such a lack of self-reflection, almost an inability. And I
Yeah.
definitely know that with my dad, it was a complete inability ever to be self-respective. Everything was about him all the time.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Just tiring.
It's incredible. And now everybody says, well, it's narcissism. Well, we didn't call it narcissism.
Right.
It probably is a form of narcissism. But it does annoy me now that every second person seems to be called a narcissist.
I know. And we also recognize that our dads, their families of origin weren't necessarily easy either.
Yes. And of course, in the book, you read about his mother, who was just such a monster.
Oh my God.
Yeah, she was. I actually had to remove some of the more toxic stories of her because, the book was too long, but because it was just one kind of litany of woes. And in the end, I did have to truncate it. But one thing that isn't in the book, which I think is probably interesting, that might explain my father's mother's sort of huge problems, is that her father suicided. And I think he was post-trauma. He survived a shipwreck and for hours and hours kept the family afloat in the water in a shipwreck off New Zealand. Yeah.
And
was rescued and cared for by Maori.
Oh.
And I wonder whether that was actually significant in his life. I mean, I have no way of knowing. And then he suicided, and a huge shame in the 20s when he suicided. I'm always trying to make sense of all of these things and how they kind of fit together. But as we try and make sense of it, I'm not trying to excuse the worst of my father's behaviour and the very, negative and long-lasting effects that it had on all of us. And me trying to theorise or hypothesise about what they were. It was a bit difficult because, of course, one sister was dead and I'm reflecting on how it might have affected her. And then one sister's very much alive in this book. And she didn't like everything I wrote at first. Mean, anybody who's written a memoir knows that. Janice, you probably know that too.
Mm-hmm.
But we had some very, very, very good and very necessary conversations.
Oh, so that's wonderful.
Can happen when you finally stop living a sort of a fear of the, that life of fear that all of us led for so long. Yeah.
Right. And there's also a difference. You're the youngest, as I am, another thing that we have in common. And so the way that we recollect some events may be different than how our older siblings or parents recall the event, because of course we're younger, we had less information, we didn't have a long enough timeline to kind of frame things and understand things. So of course we're going to see things differently. So you were the youngest and thought, now in the book, was it Dodd or Dode?
No, we called her Dodd. We always called her Dodd.
Okay.
And nobody else called her Dodd, and she called me Brat. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I know. Which came to be quite a term of endearment for you.
Yes, it was. And by the time she died, she used to call me Brattle. So it was actually quite charming. So it was always Brattle. But it was Brat. Because I'm sure I was a terrible brat. A terrible brat. I mean, I was trying, as youngest children do. You're always feeling left out. You're always feeling that nobody listens to you and everybody's telling you what to do.
Right, right.
And my sister used to play that terrible game with me that they were calling kind of homes for disabled children, or the spastic centre, as it used to be called, now called the Cerebral Palsy Alliance, I hasten to add. And they used to call, or, make-believe psychiatric hospitals. and pretend to call them and to say, come and take her away. I mean, they were
my gosh. It's
stories.
Yeah, there was some there was some stuff going on there for sure. I'm wondering about so you mentioned earlier kind of feeling for many years like you were on the outside of the family, like you weren't the one that was so close as everyone else in the family. And I wonder, was it like a catch-22, or did it feed into the whole religious thing? Like when we become deeply religious, people do pull back, except for religious people, because they don't want, and they're not even sure what to make of us. But sometimes we are vulnerable to religion because we already feel like we're on the outside.
I absolutely think that was what it was. It was how much is real and how much is imagined in terms of my own sense of withdrawal and being on the outer. I was converted young at this Christian camp. I was 10. Did I sort of run to Jesus and, open my heart to Jesus as Lord because I was feeling on the outer of the family? I think so. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, I wear my conversion as a badge of honour. Yes. Then I'm more and more involved, and then I'm insisting. My mother drives me off to youth fellowships, and I started teaching Sunday school at 13. I mean, God or Goddess only knows why they gave me that responsibility. Right. But there I was with a class full of 5-year-olds, 13, teaching, and extremely responsible with this whole new community. Mm-hmm. So, of course, it's an absolute pernicious cycle, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so the family finds you difficult and strange and
judgmental.
And judgmental. Oh, massively judgmental. Oh, that's the whole theme of the book, about how massively judgmental I was. And then you become more and more of so much of an outcast, because I think my family was always loving, but somebody was a bit difficult, and somebody was always trying to convert them, always inviting them to church and evangelistic events and outreach meetings. Mm-hmm. I mean, and how tedious that was.
Right.
Yeah. And so, it was difficult. And then, of course, my sister was lived life as a bisexual woman, and then she was definitely queer and exclusively, gay from her early 30s, and probably before that as well. But, we are talking about a different time and place. Yes. And so you imagine me, I was actually a member of the group that was even promoting conversion therapy.
Yeah.
One of those ones where do you remember Cy Rogers? No? Do you know?
Just vaguely.
Cy Rogers used to come and talk at the meetings. He was an American man who, was a gay man who got married. And I don't know what happened to Cy. He probably suffered the suffering of the damned. I don't know. Talking about the need to, rid yourself of the gay lifestyle. This was my life with this gay sister who I loved so much.
Right. But your religious beliefs.
Time.
Yes, because you loved her and yearned for a closeness and emotional connection with her, but you felt that you had to be obedient to your religious training, which told you in no uncertain terms that it's not good to be gay. We can only be straight. That's how it has to be. And that puts you in puts both of you in such a bind, such a difficult position.
It was absolutely terrible. And I look back on it now, and look, this is no spoiler for the book, because it's clear that it's a memoir about my relationship with her and that she has died. You could read that from the front cover. Mm-hmm. But, if she'd lived, I think we could have talked this through in a much more sophisticated way. I think we could have really come to terms a lot more with what happened in our family. But as it turned out, I was a fairly new sort of deconvert when she died. I was only 3 years out of the church, and that's not long.
Mhm.
You definitely aren't in the church, but you've still got a whole lot of kind of strange beliefs going on at 3 years.
Yeah.
I did.
Mhm.
But,
Mhm.
so that's another source of immense grief, that we've never had those conversations.
Right. Yeah. Your sister seemed so interesting. And you know what, definitely there were times in the book where it seemed like there was envy on your part. And I'm
Oh,
not sure
yeah.
how that could not be when one sibling of three kind of launches into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And it's not just poetry, then it's like plays and songs and all this kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff. It's hard not to feel some jealousy there,
Yeah.
and even hoping, when you're younger, oh, maybe I can write, maybe I'll be a writer, and then even your own little girl sending things to her auntie Dot about, here's the writing that I
Yeah, that
did,
was
maybe I can
funny.
be famous. It was sweet. It was so sweet.
Yes, it is. It was, I mean, I was jealous of her. I was jealous of her success, but also sort of fairly awestruck by it. But, I was jealous, but I was so sort of proud. I mean, when you've got somebody in the family who is, becoming a well-known public figure, it's quite an interesting experience, because you just know them as your sister, but other people are sort of canonizing them, as
Yeah, besotted. Yeah.
yeah. And she loved that too. She loved her fangirls. Oh my God, she had all these gay fangirls who really loved her. And she loved it when they would all come and talk to her after gigs. And she still has an enormous following. So, yeah, I was jealous, and I was jealous of her choices. I mean, she
Yes.
was choosing adventures and fun
She was
things.
out there living life. Yeah.
Yeah. I was married at 22. People here listening know all about that. Married at 22, 3 children by the time I'm 29. That's it. You're done. Get on with it. Trying to forge a career as well. Thank goodness I did do that. Trying to have a meaningful life, make a contribution, but all the time with your time and your resources caught up and swamped by all of your church commitments.
Right. And as a woman, there are limits on how far you're allowed to excel in the church. Anyway.
Well, that ceiling, it's
That's
very low down. I don't know what it is. It's not a glass ceiling. It's the sort of
it's the basement.
Yeah, it's the basement. Yeah, you can't break through. And, maybe some people have had different experiences of churches, and there are progressive churches, we know that. But certainly in my churches, there were lots of rules about women's contribution. And, you led women's Bible study, but you didn't do anything else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something else that really struck me in the book was the multiple relationships that God, not only found herself in, but was drawn to. And I was thinking, what is she trying to do? What itch is she trying to scratch with jumping from relationship to relationship, even, jeopardizing or throwing away very loving relationships to jump into another one. And I can't help but think some of that can even relate to not feeling loved enough by our parents, not feeling seen enough, just we're going for something. We're aiming for something, but we're just not sure what it is.
Well, she's not the first person who has blown up her life having affairs. That's for sure. Lots of people do that, and then find that the fantasy bubble and the real world bubble, when they collide, it's absolutely catastrophic. And there's a poem that she wrote that I do quote in the book, which is all about just longing for that asteroid called Eros to crash through your world and blow you up. There's something about eroticism and something about the enormous fantasies that she had around love and passion and lust and sex that really she longed for. And I also think that if she didn't have these passionate, wild experiences, she wouldn't be able to write. So she saw them as fueling her work. It was like her muse. And if she led one of these lives of sort of quiet desperation or whatever that us Christians were living.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's not the comparison, but if she lived the more quiet domestic life, she wouldn't be able to write anymore. And she did suffer from crippling fears about not being able to write, but just in her daily life. She was fearful a lot of the time. That is a direct result of growing up in a household that's marinated in fear. You do grow up as the eldest child, very sort of hypervigilant. You absolutely do. And she had that because she was always looking out for everybody.
Yes.
Eldest children, over-responsible, over-functioning. That's what she was doing. So I think you're right. I think there was that sense of wanting love and reassurance and to fill that cup. But she also just was drawn to these passionate experiences. And, you know, I wanted some.
Yeah, she was so in touch with her sexual self and with pleasure and wanting that pleasure, wanting to like that idea of that Eros asteroid, you know, crashing in and blowing everything up. It's exciting to be desired by another person. The beginnings of the stirrings of relationship. I mean, there's not much that compares to that.
Well, in the book, I did write about an affair that I had. You know, it's a very honest book, as you know, as yours was. We told the truth, and she told me about a book when I was embarking on that affair called Intimacy. I can't remember the name of the writer, but in that book, the person writes that he would step over the bodies of his dead children to get to the lover.
Wow.
And I remember reading this book thinking, okay, this is the window into passion. You will give up everything for it. And, you know, I think people who have had these experiences relate to it, but it is so dangerous. It is, you know, it's so dangerous. And in the end, she did discover the danger, and she did, you know, have to confront the terrible danger of these multiple relationships and start to live the quieter life, as, you know, won't give away everything in the book, but that's what, you know, she had to do.
It seemed like there was incredible personal growth that took place.
Yes.
Yeah, it really was a treat to read that book you gave. I felt like you were opening a curtain, just, you know, letting everyone come in and have a view of what it was like.
Well, thank you. Thank you. No, I was actually thinking about your shameless sexuality. And she's got a book which we actually did publish posthumously called Love Poems, which are full of some of her more sexy. They kind of follow the theme of passion and quiet and boredom and, you know, the whole gamut of love and sexuality. So it might be a book that people like. Her love poems. They're pretty wild.
Is the book called Love Poems?
Yeah, it is. It's Dorothy Porter Love Poems.
Okay.
So I was just kind of for people who like reading about love poems, and a lot of people do. You know, when somebody says, I want to read a poem at a wedding about love or something, well, you know, there's plenty to choose from, even though they are a bit wild. Yeah.
And I was really intrigued also by some of the influences from ancient mythology and Egypt and things like that. I mean, her brain just was, it seemed like such an interesting place to be. She had lots going on in there.
Yeah. No. Well, she was a sort of a keen intellectual as well. And I think, anybody who suffered grief, and of course this is a book about grief, has to come to terms with that idea that somebody who's so alive and so extraordinary and fills the room and has such a presence, such a physical presence, is then just gone. And there'll be, lots of people who have those experiences about the losing somebody suddenly. And that is an experience that's very hard to explain until you've actually experienced the sudden loss, because there's no preparation. And it's extraordinary. You can't, it's like that Joan Didion book, when her husband died suddenly. It's called The Year of Magical Thinking, where you think they're alive all the time. You can't believe they're gone.
And your body still feels like they're alive. Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. And then your body is doing all kinds of crazy stuff because you are grieving, but you hope they're still alive. Yeah. And the conversations that you wish you'd had. And, but yeah, I think probably that's what the book's about more than anything. It's about love and grief. And that's a universal experience, I guess.
What helped you in the wake of that tremendous loss? Did you attend support groups? Did you throw yourself into work or reading, or what was?
Well, look, I did throw myself into reading, because reading books about other people suffering grief, I think that helps. It gives you a language. I used to go on long walks, and I was so used to praying, because I'd stopped praying. I used to talk to her, and I still do talk to her. And one thing I did that surprised me immensely, and to be honest with you, it was very helpful, is I went and saw a psychic. I mean, I mean, it's not the sort of thing Christians do, or even ex-Christians do. Somebody suggested I go and see her. This was very soon after she died. And she taped it on a cassette tape of what she said. And then I could never bear to listen to the cassette again, and I never have. She basically, because I went there and I said I can't survive without her, and she was my protector in the family, and I want to disown my family, and she was the only one who actually understood me, and I was full of all of this. And the psychic said, she's telling me you can look after yourself, which, it depends what you think about those things, whether in fact the dead revisit us. I'm not going to say they don't. And she was saying a whole lot of things that she was saying to me, and I found it very calming and very reassuring. And I know lots of people do go and see psychics. And I think only those who suffer crippling grief understand why you would even need to go and see a psychic. Because normally it would be fairly bizarre for me to do.
Right. But the desperation to stay connected.
Yeah, I was desperate. But I think some psychics are just very intuitive, and they're good psychotherapists.
Right.
And they say obviously what you're wanting to hear.
Right. Good at reading people. But the one that you saw, whether it was, something from beyond the grave, or whether it was her just recognizing what you needed to hear, she did you a wonderful service in that moment by telling you can do it on your own. You have what you need to move forward.
Yeah.
Those are
and
powerful
there was no God
words.
in it at all. There was no God in it at all. That was a big turning point, I think. Yeah, there's no God and there's no prayer. That you actually are cast back on your own resources, and you can do this on your own. And yes, I do think that she helped me a lot. So the other thing that helped me too is the sort of that therapeutic concept of, allowing the people who we have lost, who have died, to become a part of our lives, even in an unseen way. So I kept reflecting on that question about how am I different as a result of her loving me? And how am I different as a result of my relationship with her? Which is a question I ask clients. And that actually helps you to honor your changes. It's a variation on that idea that they're always in your heart with a little bit more body to it. That as a result of this relationship, you go forward in life differently. So how can you honor that legacy? And, that's why I think one of the reasons why I did my PhD, and I now spend a lot of time counseling people about spiritual trauma. And then I wrote this book.
Yeah.
That comes from the legacy of grief.
Right. And how long did it take you to write the book?
Oh, far too long. It was very complicated because people think you throw these things together in 5 minutes. I started in 2018 and I sort of had to read all of her diaries. I read all of her books. I read all the letters that I could find that survived that she's written to and from. So it was sort of a year of reading and research.
Yeah.
And then I wrote, maybe 200,000 words, which is, of course, nobody's interested in that. And, I had an agent who didn't like it, who didn't like the book. And so I went through months of discouragement and, I'm telling this to people who are thinking about writing, you really do have to gird your loins, if you want to use a biblical phrase.
Right.
And then I changed my literary agent and found somebody who did like the book.
Yes.
That was difficult in itself, but that turned the corner because she liked it.
Excellent.
And she suggested some quite significant changes. I needed this help.
Yes.
And I did change it. And then she pitched it to publishers, which is what agents do for you. And then she found a publisher. There was a lot of rejections. And then she found a publisher who loved it, who said, we also want a raft of changes, which I then did. Took a year of editing.
Yeah.
So, when you sort of get to the final product, there's a lot that has gone in between. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then you
thought. Yeah.
Yes. And you also had family members and close friends who would read the manuscripts. I think you said your husband must have read it 40 times or something like that.
Well, to protect the living, and I'm not going to, I won't go into all of the issues with those who are living and some of their thoughts on the book, because suffice to say, some people didn't like it and did disagree with elements of it. So I had to navigate that. There were some strong personalities in that book.
Yeah.
Did you have that experience? Yeah.
Well, I have 2 daughters, and the oldest one said, "Oh, I'm so excited. I can't wait to read it." And the youngest one said, "You talk about sex in that book, because if you do, I don't want to even touch that. Don't want to know anything about your sex life, lady." That was hysterically funny. But my oldest daughter, who's in her late 20s, she really touched me when she read it, and she immediately wrote me a letter and said she knows me now in a way that she never knew me before, and that she was proud of me for the changes that I've gone through. And
isn't that wonderful?
It was beautiful. And my mom, who's in her mid 80s, I actually told her I didn't want her to read it because she is still a person of faith. And I didn't think it would be, I don't want her having an existential crisis this late in her life. I'm happy for her to slide into home base there, no problems. So I didn't think it would be particularly helpful for her. But then one day she said, "Darling, my daughter has written a best-selling book and I want to have it on my shelf."
Oh, And did she
No
read
to
it as
that.
well as have it on the shelf?
I don't know, but I immediately, dedicated a copy to her
Of
and gave
course,
it to
of
her and
course.
just thanked her for always being there for me. And now she has it, and whether she reads it or not is up to her.
That's so interesting because my mother in the last year before she died, she knew all about this book. And she
Okay.
said, will I read it or won't I read it? And
Oh,
I said to her, look, of course you can read it, but I don't think you'll like it. She said, there is going to be stuff in it I don't like, is there? And I said, yes, Mum, because I had to be really honest. And she said, maybe I won't. And she was so ambivalent because, of course, it hadn't been published yet. So in a way, I'm glad she didn't read it. But I actually
nothing
think
in there was against her. It was I thought the way you portrayed your mother was quite
but
lovely.
the loyalty to my father, she wouldn't have
Yes.
liked it, that I'd betrayed his memory, etc.
Oh, yeah.
There would have been all of that. But do you know what? I think she would have probably been like your mother, had it on the shelf and read it, because her elder sister, who's 101, is having it read to her at the moment.
Oh my
And
gosh.
she's a little confronted by it, I'm told, but she's so proud and she loves it because she's also in the book, my mother's elder sister. I know, it's incredible. So
Yes.
it's very interesting. And my eldest son, the one who's very close to my sister, did launch the book. And he gave a speech at the launch. He also said, like your daughter, you really, and he's 40, he said, you really have to come to terms with your mother as not just your mother, who's lived a whole other life apart from you and your relationship with her. And he gave this really sort of lovely speech about the courage to leave the church and whatever. So they do come good, these kids.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Wow. Yeah. And so you do share some of your story in the book, but it really revolves around your relationship with your sister and the family dynamics. And then, yes, also, this is what was going on with you. I thought it was very evenly done.
Yeah, well, look, in the end of the day, it's a sort of a family memoir. And, I'm trying to kind of appeal to a wide audience. Those people who loved my sister, those people who are interested in sister stories, people who are interested in family trauma and generational trauma.
Yeah.
And kind of the legacies and how you come to terms with it in your life, as well as, of course, the whole ex-evangelical community about the slowness of the journey, the pain of the journey, why you might have chosen a life like this. And I guess maybe this is blindingly obvious to lots of people, but a lot of us get involved in the church because of family trauma. We do. And we find solace in the church, at least initially, and fun and community.
Yeah. I mean, my time in the church definitely was not all bad. I never would have imagined myself on the other side of things. It was my identity, my community, my worldview. It's the way that I interpreted everything about my life was through the lens of Christianity. So to lose that or divorce that, whatever you want to say, it was shocking. It was unexpected, and it brought upon some profound grief, as I now had to kind of build a new life for myself that is secular, that has nothing to do with that religion at all. And it was painful for people who knew me in the church and saw me as a really godly woman. And in church, you're often lauded for your radical, however radical you are. Oh, if you're going to fast and pray for a week, how about 2 weeks? Like how it's the most impressive thing. And outside the church, it's like, that I think you're getting radicalized and becoming more and more extreme when you're doing things like that.
And I
But
think you're
inside
in
the
an
church, it's
abusive
praised.
relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And
But I
all
didn't
that,
see it that way.
no, and all that kind of residual longing for what we had in the church. I have to admit I've got very little of it now because there's a lot of water under the bridge. But I did have that. That kind of venturing into a church and just crying when they'd start singing hymns, just crying, feeling you can't relate, feeling the trauma, feeling the longing for what you had. There's such a long period of, that kind of liminal phase where you've left, but you're not where you want to be. You're kind of in this middle phase.
You're in the void.
Yeah. And I think now residual longing, I said to my husband the other day, do you ever miss church on Sundays, ever? He said, absolutely not.
That's great. That's such an honest answer. But it takes a while to get there, and it makes sense because we spent decades in a community, and then
we
it
used to
takes
get
us a
there
while
early to do the choruses and the singing.
Yes. Yeah. That's another thing you and I have in common. I sang in many bands. I sang in worship bands and I sang in rock bands outside the church. And you also did.
You're a good singer.
Oh, well, thank you. I did love to sing. And then you touched on some theater sports, just interests there in the book. And that is stuff that's very appealing to me as well. And I think those things also have played a role in my healing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the creative stuff.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have it. The only creative stuff was that we sang and played instruments, Christian music.
Yes.
So, that sort of creativity of performing and writing and singing, and it just wasn't kind of valorized. It wasn't sort of acknowledged as significant or important because, the message was there are many things you could do in this life, but you've got to do the most important. And we all know what the most important thing is, and that's preach the gospel.
Wow.
So all those other things all just have to go into abeyance, back burner, while you do the most important thing in life.
I have one memory from when I was with my former husband and we were pastoring in a small town. And I always had to lead the singing because he had a terrible voice. And so
I remember that from the book.
I'd be up there in my long dress and my head covering, and I'd be leading the worship. And then at one point, I was so holy, I got my air quotes, that I felt I just didn't want to get in the way of people worshiping God. So then instead of looking out into the congregation, I would turn around so they'd only see my back as I was leading worship. And I think about it now, I'm like, I'm surprised I didn't end up in a full burqa or something like that, just trying to hide myself, so that nobody would see me. Only God would shine through.
I mean, it is hilarious now, but you were so sincere. I wonder what people thought as you turned your back on the congregation so that their focus could be on God. I mean, it's only just conjecture, but there probably is, and this is kind of one of my theses about these things, there's probably a whole bunch of people who thought it was weird and crazy and what on earth are we doing here? But, that's kind of like the doubled life or the buried life.
Yes.
And you cannot give any oxygen to that says this is ridiculous or this is wrong or this is ethically dubious. No.
Right.
All of that we keep well underground.
Oh, yeah. And, even now, all these years later, still sometimes I'll be struck every once in a while with how crazy it was. Those things that I actually believed, wholeheartedly believed,
Yeah, no,
would have died for my beliefs. And now I'm like, that is craziness.
it is. I know it is craziness. And I mean, I think of myself in those sort of groups about trying to sort of persuade and counsel people from the gay lifestyle. And even while I was sitting there, I remember thinking, I'm not sure that I'm doing the right thing here.
Right.
So I am a little heartened that even while I was sitting there in this kind of very embryonic, I can't acknowledge it kind of way, I knew there was something very wrong about being in a group like this.
Right.
And anyway, I've tried to say sorry to people over the years because I feel as though repair is important.
Wow. And you made it really clear that it came clear beautifully in your book that is something that you do hold regret over. You wish that you hadn't been captivated in that way, but you were. And so now all we can do is apologize for it and just keep going.
And live a different life. It is interesting. I don't know if this is your experience, Janice, about the people who've contacted you after you've written a book like this. But I've heard from people from university from 40 years ago. I even had old school friends, lovely things. And what has been very noticeable is I have had not one piece of no contact, no email, no nothing from any of the church people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Don't tell me they don't know about it.
Yeah, and I'm living in the same town where I grew up and where
so you haven't heard from them either to convert you back, or just to tell you you're wrong, or even no, you're and just.
I'm fine with that.
So am I.
Fine with not hearing.
I did get a couple of I should read the Quran, but other than that, I haven't had too many come back to God, come to Jesus kind of exhortations.
Well, how can people find you, whether if they want to purchase your book or if they're interested in connecting with
Amazon,
you?
Isn't it?
I thought it was, I only found it in Australia. I didn't see that it was available to Canadians yet on Amazon, but is that the plan, that it will eventually be available on Amazon?
I would have thought so. I thought that, look, I don't know, because I've looked on Amazon.com and I saw that it was available, not .com.au, which is our Australian Amazon.
Right.
Although I think you can order it from the publisher.
Yes.
So if you just look me up, or even just gutsygirls.com.au, it talks about the book and the publisher, and I'm sure you can get it from the publisher, but my hope is from Amazon.com or some of those big online ones, because most of them you can. I mean, I got yours and I've got ones from America. I have an Amazon.com account because then I can get everything.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah. And do you still work with clients in Australia?
Sure do.
And how can they find you?
Well, that's easy to find me as well. Just josiemcskimming.com.au. So I'm the only one in the world. So Googling my name is easy. I'm not called, Mary Smith.
That's right.
So I'm very easy to find. And, I have done counselling with people in United States, New Zealand.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think if I've had somebody from Canada. You Canadians, you're also well adjusted. Well,
Josie, I'm so glad that you took the time to meet with me today and talk about your book and your life and your story. This is just precious to me. I hope that I can come visit you with my husband sometime soon.
Definitely. And go bird watching.
Yes.
It would just be absolutely a treat.
Perfect. Okay, I'll let you
Thank
know
you.
when this episode drops. And thank you again.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Divorcing Religion podcast. We'll talk to you again soon. Take care, everyone.